Really quick, as Laura said, my name is John Padilla. I just want to say thank you, Laura. Thank you to BSF and thank you to BYEP for tonight. So, if we don't mind giving them a little round of applause, really quick. So, you guys are probably like, why is this 25 some odd year old kid standing in front of you? Valid question. Like I said, my name is John. I originally grew up in Colorado. I moved to the Valley about 10 years ago for school here, did an undergrad in neuroscience, and then stayed for a master's degree in business and innovation. Really enjoyed the community here, got involved with BYEP. But during my sophomore year of college, my life was flipped on its head. So every parent's worst nightmare became my parents' reality. My little brother Jack was 15 years old when he died by suicide. He was a freshman in high school in Colorado, and it kind of flipped our lives totally upside down. He was not the person that you would expect. So that's a little bit of what I want to talk to you guys about tonight, is seeing the signs, but also looking for the signs where they might not even be. And I think that at least it was the case with my family, that sometimes the ones who smile the brightest or shine, their light shines through, they give the most, tend to give too much and their battery is empty at the end of the day or even overused. So I think we need to give a little extra attention to those kiddos, not just the ones that we think might be slipping behind. I think that's really important to catch those kids or make sure they never fall in the first place. But we have a duty to help kids on the other side too, that you might not even know that they're struggling. So my point being that it can affect absolutely everybody. And kind of as Laura mentioned about doing this event now and being so timely, actually lands on something called the Paradise Paradox, which is basically the idea that you live in a really beautiful place, life should be perfect for you, right? Wrong. It's not always like that. Life is complex. There's all these little intricacies that can make life really hard. And it's actually, you have a higher chance of having mental health problems when you live in a place that's really beautiful. For example, mountain towns. Suicide rates in mountain towns are 3 times the national average. To me, that's unacceptable. That tells me there's so many things going wrong there, and we can kind of get into why some of that is more in the Q&A session. But I think one of the main reasons why that is stigma. It's just not talked about enough. And it needs to just be this totally regular thing where it's like, I have a headache is saying the same thing as I'm feeling down today. So that can be used as communication, I think, for the kids. And I work a lot with teenagers, and I'll get to what I do now to kind of bring this more full circle for you guys. But I work with a lot of kids, and I get to hear how they talk about mental health a lot because they see me. That's the benefit of having a baby face and hanging out and playing these sports is they treat me like I'm a kid too. And that barrier that goes up is when there's a parent in the room goes away when I'm there. And I hear them talk all the time about mental health, like way more than you guys would think. And one of the biggest things I hear out of kids, especially in mountain towns, is they know a friend is struggling or a friend has said something that's shown that they're struggling, but the kids are afraid to tell a parent because they're afraid it's going to ruin the friendship. You got to put yourself back in the shoes of being 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. What was the number one thing in your life at that point? Your friends. They're going to tell their friends first every time. So I think we need to do a better job training the kids how to alert parents and show them that they don't want to be in my shoes where they don't have a brother here anymore because of that. So that's my little aside on the state of the snowpack when it comes to mental health. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about what I do and why mental health is important in what I do. So after Jack passed away, I started a nonprofit organization made up of everybody from teenagers to people that are in their late 80s. And they bring in this variety of outlooks to create and advise and consult on films, free skiing films about mental health. So I travel in the spring and basically interview professional skiers, everybody from Olympians to last year we met up with a group very similar to BSF called 10th Mountain Freeride out of Vail. And we took all their kids out for a full day and we skied with them for a full day and put them in the movie, gave them their own segment because they had just lost one of their kids to suicide the day before we were out there to do a different film and speech, and we decided to call an audible. So Mountain in My Mind is what it's called. We actually do our world tour in Bozeman every year. So it's kind of annual film, lots of different perspectives. But we do our annual tour every year, usually at the Rialto in September for Suicide Prevention Month. So keep an eye out for that for next year as well. You guys are all invited. You can shoot me a message. Your tickets are comped. Just let me know. I'd love to help out with the kiddos, especially the ones that need it or might not need it. You might not think that they'd need it. So that's all my time. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. And yeah, don't be strangers. Reach out. Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, sounds good. And then next up here, I just really quick would like to introduce Emily.
Hi, everybody. Hey, hi. Many familiar faces in here and many new ones, which is awesome to see. My name is Emily Donza. I have been part of this community for over 20 years now, and I have worked with BSF as a coach. I coached for Montana State University Alpine Ski Team, and I was also competed for them. So I've been part of this athletic community for a very long time. And now I work for a private practice here in town and work with clinical mental health a lot. And my primary age group is teenagers, young teenagers, high schoolers, middle schoolers, some, and then up into the college age. So this is my realm, I would say, my domain, working with mental health. So thank you, John, for giving your story and stuff, and just bringing a little more light, like you said. A lot of people are really afraid of talking about suicide, and they're afraid of talking about it is going to bring more awareness in a negative manner, but it actually brings a lot more awareness in a positive manner, just bringing up these conversations. So I'm going to read some stats for you guys because I think these are really powerful. These aren't meant to scare you. These are meant to bring light to some of the things that are happening, not only in Montana or in our county, but also nationwide. So suicide surpassed car accidents. It's the #1 injury-related death in the nation. It has increased by 30% since 1998. One suicide every 11 minutes in the nation. Take a moment to think that through. Every 11 minutes. Males are more likely to complete suicide 4 times more than females. In 2020, 581 children between the ages of 10 to 14 completed suicide, the youngest being 8 years old. Suicide is the leading cause between 15 and 24, leading cause of death. Within a typical high school classroom, 3 students, 1 male to 2 females, have made a suicide attempt in the past year. Not completed, but made a suicide attempt. 3 in a single classroom. More than 1,100 on a college campuses per year completed suicide. 1 in 12 students has made a plan. There are 24,000 suicide completions per year, or attempts, excuse me. In Montana is the 3rd highest rate in the nation. 11 through 17 years old it's hard for me to talk about this because it's such like, these numbers get to me every year, and these are just based on these stats were between 20 and 2021, and it's increased significantly in the last 2 years, especially after COVID. So between 11 and 17 years old, 12.9 per 100,000 suicide attempts every year. And that's more than double the national rate for that age group. So 11 to 17 years old. And that's in Montana. It is the #1 cause of preventable death for ages between 10 and 14 in Montana. Every completed suicide in Montana equals 6 survivors. In 2020, there was 306 suicides in Montana. That is equal to 1,800 new survivors. Like I said, these numbers aren't meant to scare you or bring doom and gloom to this room, but it also is to really show what is happening in our nation, but even more so in Montana, in Gallatin County, where we see sparkle and glam and beautiful mountains and everybody's out running. But why are we 3rd in the nation? with these numbers. We should be a lot less, and it's unacceptable, like John said. But what can we do to prevent this? And that's the cool thing. This is why we're having this talk. There are so many things that we can start doing within our team, within our age groups and teens and families and coaches and, athletics, awareness, talk about it like we are doing today. Reach out, train people how to reach out, what to look for, and just be there, be supportive. So last year, and some of you might have heard of some of the spiel already, what can we do with the teenage brain? The teenage brain is very underdeveloped in compared to adults. So when we hear somebody that has made a plan, has attempted, or has completed suicide, a lot of times you're like, why? They looked like the most sparkly kid in the room. I don't understand. But you have to remember those age groups, we tend to think that they know how the world is working and what is happening and how to solve their problems. And oh my gosh, it's just because they were comparing themselves to those people in school. But to them in that moment, they feel like that's the end of the world to them. That thing that their friend said or that their parent said is the all be all, right? And so to give you a little bit of neuroscience behind it, the brain starts developing, or our emotions start really developing as we hit puberty, right? The thought process behind them, right? So puberty hits between 10 and 12 years old in males and females, and it goes up to 25 years old is when our brain is fully functioned, fully formed. In that moment of, I'm really nervous tonight. So I'm sorry, okay. I'm like stumbling You're on all my words. Between those years, our brain, we think with our amygdala, which is the back of our brain here, and our prefrontal cortex is not fully formed yet, right? So when I give you a scenario, you're going to start thinking with this first, and it's where our rational thoughts are made. As a teenager, it actually hits the back first, and it takes a moment to go forward to actually make a rational thought. So when somebody gives a trigger response, we emotionally respond as a little child up until 25 years old, which is pretty crazy. So think through this. I am screaming at my teenager because they didn't get their thing done and this, and to them, they hit emotionally right away, and they go in anger and impulse. I hate this, school sucks, my friends suck, and then you're like, oh my God, my teenager is a crazy teenager. What am I doing with them? Rather than talking it through them and being like, hey, this is what's happening, take a breath. And so what happens? So I've told this story time and time again, so I think Molly's heard it a few times. So imagine you're walking down on Main Street and a bear is coming, and you're going to this co-op downtown and you see this huge grizzly bear, nobody else around. And you're like, holy crap, there's a grizzly bear right in front of me. And you all of a sudden go into fight or flight, right? All the brain from our blood rushes from our brain into our arms, to our legs, to our core, and we start sprinting as fast as you can. All of a sudden, I come out from the side and go, hey, how much is 18 plus 2? Do you think you'll be able to respond to that? Probably not. You probably won't even hear it, right? You keep on running, you make it into the co-op, it's made out of steel, you're safe. I might ask you again, this time you might hear it, but you still won't be able to answer. It will take about 30 minutes for that blood to rush back up into the brain, and you'll be able to breathe, and you're like, Emily, what'd you ask? 18 plus 2, 20, duh, right? That's what's happening to these teenagers in that moment. They go into that fight or flight response, their emotional response. And what are you supposed to do when you see a grizzly bear? Slow down, breathe, take a few steps back. You're not going to run, right? And this is their trigger. Their bear is their trigger. Whatever that is, they go into that fight or flight and they run, instead of, if all they knew is like, hey, take a deep breath. I know I got mad at you, but let's breathe together. Let's bring that blood back into the prefrontal cortex. Let's give it time to get there and kind of rearrange and rework and be like, it's not the end of the world. Okay, how do we work through this together, right? So this story is, I use this story a lot because I think it is a really good one in Montana, especially with grizzly bears, being like, I have a lot of teenagers being like, oh, my grizzly bear came to attack me, but I was able to breathe through it and actually become rational what was happening, right? So on our phones, a lot of times when we're scrolling, we get those trigger responses right away. You see somebody that's skinnier, that's somebody that's cooler, somebody that's doing something that's better. And instead of breathing through it, especially between that age group of 10 to 25 years old, even being in my 30s now, I still have that response and I have to breathe through. I'm like, whoa, that's a highlight reel of somebody's life. That's not the real thing, right? But in a town like this, it happens a lot. And these teenagers are like, oh my gosh, that's so much cooler. Oh my gosh, this. And then the impulse of texting somebody or doing that, it's just this trickle effect, right? So remembering that a lot of like bringing it back, slowing it down, telling them, hey, talk through it. Let's see what's going on. This is some of the stuff that we're doing with our staff, with the coaches of like, that race isn't the end of the world. That run wasn't the end of the world. Things that are happening at home, let's talk through it. Maybe I can help you, right? And training parents to understand that too, because I know we're tired. I have a 4-month-old. I'm exhausted. But sometimes when he's crying, I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I'm like, wait, he's just a little kid. I can't imagine having teenagers at one point and being like, oh, I'm so tired. But then I just need to slow down. Me too. And to teach them through that too a little bit. So the grizzly bear one is a really big way of just remembering how the brain works, giving yourself time to let that rationality return and calm down. A few years ago, there was a big study done in Brazil about how children and teenagers recognize facial expressions in comparison to adults. And they brought 2 groups in, elderly and mid-30s up, I guess. That's not elderly, obviously, but the elderly and then older adults. And then a bunch of teenagers from the ages of 13 to 19. And they show them different pictures. And one of the biggest ones they did a picture of somebody with a really face like this, right? What do you think the young adults or teenagers saw? Anybody? What do you think they identified that as? Anger, right? And how about the adults? Concern, right? And it was a face of concern, but the teenager expressed it as, oh my God, they're so mad. How many times do you guys have that with your kids, your athletes? Concern, disappointment even, but the anger is like, oh. And that has been with every different type of recognition of different facial expressions. They're quick to jump to the impulse of the higher highs rather than like more equal facial expressions. So even at school, imagine somebody's passing them in a classroom, one of their friends, their best friend, Johnny, and they're like, oh, Johnny hates me. He had this picture, this face, and I did something really wrong. And then he goes to Johnny later on. And Johnny's like, hey, why didn't you wait up for me to walk to lunch? And he's like, you were mad at me. And he goes, no, I had to pee so bad after class. I couldn't talk to you. Again, mistake. How many times does that happen on a day-to-day basis? And a lot of times, like John said, it happens to the kids that want to give the most, that want to be there, that want to prove themselves, that give their all in all. And then they're the ones that are struggling the most behind the doors because they're afraid of saying, hey, today sucked, that their parents are going to get disappointed or their coaches are going to be disappointed or they're not going to be the best friend of everybody. And then when they're there, they're the saddest. It happens in our community. I've had clients that you see on Instagram over and over again that are promoting this and promoting that, and this is so cool, and this is so cool. And then behind doors, they're the ones that are like, I am completely depleted, crying their eyes out. I'm like, why don't you show that on Instagram? That it's not all nice and good. Because then the next person that's actually struggling in my room is like, but that person on Instagram, all these people, they're their own, bosses, and they run baldy in the morning before class, and then they go do this and they go do that. True stories. We laugh, but it's literally, I'm pulling from that, right? And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So that goes into a whole nother thing of social media. And this is going to be my wrap up. And then we'll go into Q&As, just of other stuff, is like social media, cell phones. We've had this conversation with some of our coaches recently of taking away the phones during practices and telling parents, hey, no phones during practice whatsoever. I have my phone if anything happens. You call me. it gives more responsibility to coaches, a pain. Sometimes I've been a coach for parents to be calling, but it takes away. And one of my coaches was like, well, they just, in between reps or something, they'll check their phone and they're not like scrolling on it. I'm like, that's the impulse of taking it completely. And direct correlation to that, the most simple thing, lack of sleep is number one that causes depression and anxiety in teenagers right now because of phone usage. They're on their phones till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, have to get up to get to their 7 a.m. classes, 8 a.m. classes. Don't take a rest. Lack of sleep increases depression and anxiety because guess what? We're not getting enough sleep, enough rest, which then doesn't give us enough response and stimulus to our brain to actually deal with anxiety and stress. And that might be a conversation that we have to have on a bigger thing. When do you take away the phones? For parents, for coaches? It might have to be something that BSF works with coaches and being like, hey, and parents, hey, during practice, we have no phone policy. When we're on the road during dinner, no phone policy. I used to do that. That was 10 years ago when I was coaching for BSF, when they just came out. We'd put them in a bucket and I said, everybody text your parents. Tell them that if they need anything, Emily has her phone. And then there's the interaction a lot more too. So sorry for stumbling. It took me a little bit to get into there. It's been a long day, but I hope that gave you a little bit of preface into question and answering, and we can kind of get more into detail with that stuff. Thank you.
Nice work.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would have noticed the stumble if you hadn't said anything.
I rather see it. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amazing.
With experts?
Yeah.
Sure. I'll ask
Go
a
for it.
question. So I have an 11-year-old,
Mhm.
and he's really athletic and pretty positive, likable kid. And he very often says he wants to kill himself or die. How would you handle a comment like that?
You want to go first, John?
Sure. Does he have a therapist?
No, I pretend he is there,
Okay.
which is probably not helpful, but maybe it's I'd say it's the way I've taken it is that it's an expression of frustration, overwhelm,
Okay.
tiredness, depression, anxiety. And so then I go into what's going on for you. Let's talk about that. And he's pretty good at expressing his feelings, but I'm just kind of curious. He's been saying things like that. And I just take it as like that's his expression of I'm really having a hard time. But I'm kind of curious what your advice would be.
She's probably better suited to talk about this with impulse control,
Yeah. So at that age, especially, what I say a lot of times, it's really good when people talk about it. Like if I have a client, whether it's a young adult or an adult that comes to me and talks about like, I've been thinking about killing myself, or I've been made plans, or whatever the case may be, it's a lot better than somebody that's not telling me. So in that sense, it is very good that he feels like it's a safe space to come to you and say that. Like the only problem with that is like, remember my story of the impulse control, that in that moment when things are super heightened, if you're not around or something like that happens and it's not an adult that can kind of think through rationally, like we always make safe plans with our clients, right? With my clients, I'm like, okay, if this happens, what's the plan? You can do that with a young little, I would say a little child too, but in that moment, impulse control cannot, they don't have the rationality of kind of breathing through it, talking through it. So one of the things you can do is connect with somebody that is trained to make them feel like, oh, okay, I have this other person that knows how to train through this, and that will update you because he's a minor too, so that you have that secondary safe plan, and you make a plan with him of being like, hey, I know this sounds a lot of times that you're really upset when you're doing this. Let's make a plan if I'm not around or dad's not around or whoever's not around, that you can kind of talk yourself through that. So whether it's like a lot of times is getting that blood flowing again. So like maybe if you have stairs in the house, like do a few flights of stairs, because then it kind of gives that breathing. It's almost like when people are hyperventilating, you want them to pass out to re-get their breath, because if not, they just completely don't know how to regain that consciousness. But like Dawn was saying, the impulse control for a younger age group, I I would be more wary of it if it is a continuous, you see like it increasing, especially as his age goes up, because the impulse control isn't there as much. Do you have anything more for that type of stuff?
I, I think it
Just
would
from your
become like
knowledge.
cause for concern if he were saying that in other situations too.
Mm-hmm.
So if it were me as a parent and I'm 25 and I don't have kids, but so take my advice with a grain of salt, I would ask his friends if they've ever heard him say anything about that. They may or may not tell you, but if they do tell you and he has said that before, you've unearthed something.
Yeah. Yeah. Teachers, coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just to be more aware.
Contemporaries, I'm like certain it's the key to getting to the kids is through other kids. I saw a question right there.
What about like teenagers and anxiety? You have to do and just one of them has a lot. We even know that I just feel like right, like right? So what kind of things would you do as a parent to kind of help with that anxiety? And it can be in different situations.
Yeah.
Social situations. Like how to deal with
Yeah. Do they come to you at all?
That was my next question.
she helps me.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
Pay for it.
also, and I can tell that she's like, I can tell. Worked up on it, overthinking it.
Yeah.
So just like, it's okay. And it'll be fine if you get in that
Is she,
Mhm.
I don't,
is she a perfectionist?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
It's really common for kids, especially if she's really gifted, like intellectually, on that end of the spectrum, to have really high anxiety levels. It's actually something I suffered from as a kid. Was that same sort of feeling of just like impending, like not necessarily doom, just like everything was just coming all together at once, you know? And I think the one thing that helped me get through it, and it's going to be different case by case, but what helped me was having a physical outlet outside and getting exercise, to be honest with you, and like working myself to the point where it's like, okay, I'm so exhausted. I can't let my thoughts race right now because I'm going to go to sleep the second my eyes shut. That's what worked for me. And obviously I'd talk to a therapist. But that's what worked best for me.
Yeah. And going off of that, I think the big thing is like when I was talking about social media and phone usage and stuff, a lot of the correlation to like anxiety and depression is not feeling like they don't have enough time to do other things, like being outside. They might be super athletic, but knowing a lot of things that I work with my teenagers is like intention behind the stuff they're doing. So owning the space they're in. So you're like, okay, what are you anxious about right now? And it might be multiple things, but it's bringing it to the here and now. Like, what can we work on right now? Because a lot of the anxiety, remember, depression comes from past thinking. Anxiety comes from futuristic thinking. And so, and a lot of times we either live in one or the other, past or future, and not in the here and now. And so bringing them back down, like I do the five senses, like, okay, what do you feel? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you taste? And that brings them to the here and now. And then you can be like, okay, what can we work on right now? And that's one that you can just do like in the kitchen. Like if she comes to you or he comes to you and they're like, I'm super anxious. Hey, five senses. What do you feel? What do you smell? What do you hear? And then from there you go, okay, what can we work on right now to work on it? A quick, like, imagine somebody that's going to the Olympics and their coach comes to them and says, you're going to the Olympics in 4 years. And they're like, the Olympics? Oh my God, 4 years? I can't get there. I don't even know how to, what? And you're like, wait, bring it back. You know how to train. You know how to listen to direction. Take it day by day. And then they're like, oh yeah, okay, I can make it to the Olympics because I'm thinking about right now, not what's going to happen in 4 years from now. Does that help a little bit too, kind of?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of good resources online for parents too. And I encourage everyone to go check those out. There's actually, I worked with Amazon Prime to produce a documentary that kind of touches a lot on social media if you're interested in checking that out too, and kids. And we interviewed exclusively teenagers basically, and parents that were suicide survivors, and a variety of other things. But they really do a great job at covering, the director in that film did. And he lists a ton of resources, national resources that can lead you to the individual state resources too. And it's just on YouTube. It's called Childhood 2.0.
BSF is in the process of putting together a online toolkit for our
Yep.
parents and community members just to make sure.
Let me know. Yeah.
So it's really like this idea of bringing the about mental health and having them be advocates for their friends.
Mm-hmm.
How, some teens are pretty reluctant sometimes to have those conversations. So either of you start those conversations and to keep them going, more comfortable.
Yeah. I'll leave that to you because you work with them like more hands-on that way.
There's a one sentence question that I firmly believe can save a kid's life. And I've heard stories of it working, and that's directly asking them, have you ever had suicidal thoughts? Direct, to the point. You know your kid, and you know when they're lying to you too. That's, if I could go back and ask my brother one question, do one thing, I would ask him that question.
And then what about talking to them for their friends? Having them like, okay, how are your friends doing? How do you check it? How do you coach your kids to
Lead by example. Show them, talk to them how you want them to talk to their friends. Like, everything kids know is from their parents and their friends at school and the kids on their team. That's their world.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I mean, it's one of the biggest things coming out of grad school and stuff like that. When I started doing what I do, clinical therapy, they train you on how to ask, like, are you having suicidal thoughts? And at the beginning, I was like, oh, that's a direct question that you ask, right? Like for me, and I was in the field, and now it's like the easiest question to ask. It's every time. How are you doing? Are you having any suicidal thoughts? And then they tell you. It's crazy. Adults will tell you, where they used to be like, I don't want to talk about this. They'll come in and be like, oh, yeah. The ones that, obviously not all my clients are like that, but it's crazy. The more you talk about it, like I said at the beginning, we're all afraid of talking about it. But the more you talk about it, the more it brings awareness. And then the more it trickles down to those teenage years and stuff of being like, after this talk, and then even just being with BSF last year, the amount of people that reached out, and like student athletes that reached out to me, and they're like, hey, my friend, what should I do? Even just that. And then I could do the trickle effect. And that's what we're also trying to do. Have that presence on there. When I worked for the Colorado Rapids for a long time with the youth leagues and stuff, and I was on the field. We had, not only me, we had a big group, and just having that presence on the field, kids would come up to me every day and just talk. They just want to talk, but they don't know how, and they're afraid of doing it. But the more that you make it, you normalize it for them, they'll come home and be like, Mom, my friend Johnny today wasn't doing really well. Should I tell somebody? Or, hey, I had a really crappy day, and actually saying it, not just be like, how'd school go? Fine. How many times do we hear that? How's school today? How's practice? Fine. Good.
There's a group called Hope Squad.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, either one of us can.
I was just thinking that would be a really neat thing to have in our team. We don't have it right now, but it's training kids to be that person.
That'd be cool.
Be on the lookout for other kids, and it's basically where students in the school nominate the kids that they think they would most want to tell, that they'd be most comfortable telling. And that group of kids gets trained through a curriculum that's designed for either elementary, they can have a junior class, or middle or high school, and 11 or more pieces on everything, because it takes a lot for a kid to be able to take that information in and not feel responsible for it, but be able to turn that into adults. wondering, like, should we get this in our high schools or middle schools or even like a BYUP?
Mhm.
We do a little hope squad group at BYUP or within the BSF community.
I think so.
Because the training modules are really
Yeah.
fun. I don't know if
Yeah, I know the folks that started that. So if you guys want an intro there, just let me know, and I'm happy to make that. But I know Bozeman's a market they're trying to get into too. So
Kind of a follow-up to something you just said. When a kid kind of shuts down or just says, yeah, I'm fine, can you give us some tips on how to draw them out a little bit? It's really hard. Even if they, you start to talk to them and they stand up and walk away. How, how, how do we overcome that so that we can help them talk about anything? I mean, like what's going on in school, but more importantly, their emotions.
Me to go? That's a great question because it is hard, right? They just block it out. They're like, "Oh, mom, dad, you wouldn't understand," right? That's what I get a lot of times. I think it just goes back again to just keep on asking, but without. I lost my train of thought. So asking without like pressuring too much of being like, tell me what happened at school. Just being like, hey, you can even start the conversation of like, hey, we're going to start this new thing. And actually, this is a challenge for all of you guys. When you come home from school, I want you to like give me one thing that went really well and what went like what's worth improving in your day, because then it gives them a task rather than giving them a full spectrum of like, how'd your day go? And that can be like, they're in school for 8 hours and then maybe athletics for another 2,000 things happen in a teenage world. So giving them like one good thing to think about and one thing that they want to improve on could be one. I use this in athletics, and I look at Molly a lot because she's used this a lot too with her stuff. But I think it's really important to give them a block, a compartmentalization of where they can go. So like even when I'm working in my realm, and it's different because it's a therapeutic realm, so they feel a little more like safe space. But it gives them, I'm like, hey, let's talk about one thing that went really well at school today. Okay, and what's one thing that kind of upset you? You can even phrase it like that. And then they talk about that. And then in athletics, how did athletics go today? Whatever it is, whether it's biking or skiing, and they tell you that. And then how about friendships? And that's always the more intricate one. And sometimes they'll open up, but if you start normalizing it a lot of times and giving them two things, and then a lot of times it's, you can even preface like, do you want feedback or do you want me to just listen? And that gives them also a safe space, because as parents, as coaches, a lot of time we feel like we always need to give feedback because we want to tell them what's best, because we can see it from the outside too. But you can say, do you want just support or do you want me to give you feedback on this? And you'll be surprised. I work with families all the time and it does work. It's just normalizing it again, asking and not being afraid that, oh, she's going to jump down my throat if I ask how's school and for 1,000th time, It might, but the more you do it, the first time they might not answer, the second time they might not answer, but the third, fourth, fifth, it will start getting easier. Yeah.
give them 30 minutes. That's what I would have wanted, is a little bit of time to just like, okay, it's like a turtle, they're not quick creatures. I get out of my shell when I come home and
Stretch out.
yeah. Give a little lag there for like, boy, to be honest with you, like I say it jokingly, but it goes back to impulse control. And so their brain is still like, best way to put it is like hot brain. So they're like still, if something happened, they're still ruminating, thinking about it. Their brain's still hot. Let that wire cool off a little bit, and then do everything she said. I saw another question.
I just had a question on that same note. Do you think it's helpful or not for you to go first? Say what was good about your day?
And be real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
Like John said, we're the best people that they look up to, right? Like practice what you preach. That I use my own stories in my life to all my clients because I'm a human too. And then it normalizes it a lot more and you're like, okay, I'm not the only one that thinks this stuff sometimes. Or okay, I'm not the only one that's going through things like that, right? It's the same thing of why I mentioned the social media things. The more we would normalize what's actually going on behind that screen and not just the bag peeking, running before 6 a.m. before the sun comes up, working really hard. Yeah, we all do that, but that's a glimpse, right? So normalize it. Go before, but be if you're gonna do it, I say be real. Yeah, work was really hard today. This is what happened that I wish I could have improved on. I screamed at one of my employees. Next time I'm going to take a deep breath before that. But what went really well is that later on I kind of put my ego aside and I apologized. Simple things like that. And then they're like, oh, dad actually opened up to me. That's cool. I can do that too.
Got to give trust to get trust.
I wonder if you guys can comment on when kids come home and do share with you, like, Susie told me that she's, and as a parent, when is it your responsibility to call that parent?
Way easier to make a phone call and have it end up be nothing, and get the kids some help if they need it, or it could just be a red flag that turned out to have nothing behind it. But I think right away, that's where the benefit of, as my mom always called it, the mommy network, all the moms that talk.
Yeah. Just think about mandatory reporting. If you see something, a lot of times, like when we call CPS and stuff, it's better calling CPS, Child Protective Services, and raising a red flag, and then they'll talk you through it than not doing it and then something happening.
Yep.
Same concept. You might, excuse my language, piss off your kid or a parent or something, but what's the alternative?
Yeah, I think that's a concern I hear from a lot of parents too, is that they're worried they'll lose their kids' trust if they go and they tell that kid's parents. But and the kid you might for a couple days, but a lot better than, and you can tell this to them too, like it's a lot better than the alternative, which is your friend not being around anymore.
Another discussion I would have, having been worried about a neighbor who expressed suicidal action, actually, was that I called 211, our health center, which also you can call 988.
Yeah.
But 211 will get us, if you're calling from Bozeman, it'll get to our local health center. And right now, if you dial 988, it'll go to the place of your area code. If you have an obsolete phone number, it'll go to Colorado or Massachusetts. So we just, right for now, maybe better to call 211. But what I called them for was, we work in mental health as the executive director of Big Sky Youth Empowerment, but I called because in the moment it was Thanksgiving Day, and I wasn't even sure what services would be available or what to do because traumatic a bit that you try to help someone in the moment. So they were just really helpful and walked through some things I hadn't even thought of, like, are all of his meds, can you ask them permission to take them out of the house? Is it a firearm? Yeah, ask them if you can take them out of the house, make him safe in the moment, and then go do that and call me back. And so it's just like having this guide. And so if you have a kid friend, your kid is telling a friend, and you're not sure what to do in that moment.
Yeah.
Always remember 211.
Great advice.
So nice.
Yeah.
So helpful.
They talk you through everything. And it's better safe than sorry. This is that's why I said the CPS. Yeah.
It is. Yep. Better safe than sorry.
Yep. Anybody else?
Chilling back on the lawn chairs.
So, I think depression and anxiety are things that are definitely being talked about more, and with that, we have younger kids hearing those words thrown around a lot of the time. Do you guys have advice on how to help a kid define what these large words are, and can they be good sometimes? Are they always bad? With something like anxiety, so how can we kind of teach them what it is, and then help them start identifying it and working on it.
And to piggybacking on that, I think kids now know these are a little bit trigger words. So I'll have, one of my kids said,
Mhm.
Mom, you're causing me anxiety. And I'm like, wait a minute, you can't throw out that word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they use it, and I think partially they throw the words around a lot.
Mhm. Gonna hit on it first. I can go too.
You can go first.
Okay. It's actually, that's really interesting because I've seen a lot of studies about this, but Laura sent me a really good one recently, an article about how this new era of normalizing mental health is actually, there's like this really fine line of equilibrium of balance that we're trying to find where it's normalizing it so that we decrease suicide rates and mental health, but it also is kind of increasing a lot of mental health issues because kids are starting to identify anxiety and depression as something that usually they would work through normally, right? It wouldn't be a trigger to them anymore. Something that happens at school, it's not a trigger that then has this domino effect of like, oh, I'm anxious, oh, I'm depressed, oh, this or that. So to Cody's point, they're terms that are almost being overused. How do we find that balance that, okay, when we actually have anxiety, depression, sense of overwhelmness, there's this line, and then the other side that's like, no, okay, your teacher gave you a pink slip because you didn't, finish your homework for the 1,000th time. That's not because they hate you or this or that. This is actually, now you're just overwhelmed because you have 10 assignments that you have to finish, right? And back in the day, that would just be, oh, I feel overwhelmed, or I just really don't want to get my homework done. So defining it's hard. Again, I what I keep on going back to, and I'm going to use this, is just communicating a lot with them. Is like, Cody, if one of your athletes comes up to you and is like, hey, I'm really anxious, like this is what's happening, you can ask them like, okay, what does anxiety mean to you right now? Where's this anxiety coming from? Because then you can know if it's like actual anxiety, like not actual, because it's so intricate, but you can kind of explain to them like, oh no, okay, you're anxious, but it's a good anxious, like you have nerves right now because you're about to go down your run, and this is your nerves talking. You're not anxious in a way of like complete state of like, oh, I can't do this, I gotta go, I gotta disappear, right? So I wish I'm not like explaining it well enough, but it is like just communicating so you can actually see where that line is. Really conversing and asking why, what are these feelings coming from? Because then you'll know if it's on this spectrum of like, okay, this is anxiety and depression that we're dealing with, or this spectrum, okay, these are just like nerves and feeling of sadness because, you didn't get invited to a sleepover or something like that, which then could lead it over to there. But then you actually can see where they're coming from. Does that give a little bit of a preface?
One thing I try to do as a coach is, obviously very relationship driven and communication is key. And so I hear kids throwing around those words more than I can use them myself, partially because I think with the broad spectrum of it, I even have a hard time putting down, like, obviously like crippling anxiety is one thing, but then between there, kind of where is that, and where is it a point where that can develop into depression and suicidal thoughts. And so I try to base it more off of, just like having those conversations rather than labeling things, having them, more flush out what they're feeling with situational things that happen throughout the day.
Yeah.
And going but I think it's hard to define.
Yeah. I think it's just the communication part, of really understanding what they're feeling. What are you feeling? Explain to me like where it's coming from. You ask that, it might be hard for them right away to pinpoint, but if you start conversing through it, I promise you'll get to a point where A, you'll find ways to help them through it, or B, you'll be able to direct them in a way that then you're like, okay, we need to get you to a point where we can get you the help that you need because of X, Y, or Z, right? It's the same thing if like a client comes into me and they're saying, I am feeling so depressed. And you're like, okay, what on the scale, where are you like, what is making you feel this way? What does depression mean to you? I can't get out of bed. I can't find joy in anything I do. I'm like, okay, this is where I'm at. But if you have those conversations, Cody, and you're not a licensed therapist, but if you do, then you'll still have a way of defining where that line is a little bit. And if it's in the middle and you're not sure, then you guys have me now to look back at it, but you can still kind of redirect in a way that you're like, okay, this is what we need to do next, you know?
Is it okay to, like, when they say, like, I'm super depressed or I'm feeling really anxious, to just, like, right away follow up with a question of, like, you know, explain that to me a little bit, or, you know, like, have them take it from a label to then just, like, flushing it out a little bit.
Yeah, if they're telling you.
Not to dismiss that they're not feeling that label, you know, if it's important for them to say that, but to just have them kind of.
Let's figure out why.
Yeah, if they're telling you, there's a reason why.
Yep.
You have to remember that. They look up to coaches a lot, and I know we're getting into more coaches, but even parents, there's a reason why they're telling you. Just listen.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah.
Don, for the presentation. Kind of wrap this whole thing up. It's been cool to do this and see other groups in the community that have sports teams or smaller groups be leaning into this, because I speaking for the coaches, you say that, like, obviously a pretty special place. You're not the teacher, not like other things. Care about them being something playing now. So it's been good to hear the coaches talk about it, about how they're coaching everything. I know, like, with Andrew and Drew, Cody, Kenny, like, kids spend a lot of time with these guys throughout the season. So for them to be able to catch these tools from Emily, have a speaker toolkit, has been super helpful. And I know that we've had sessions with the Nordic coaches, the Alpine coaches, and freestyle coaches. And having Emily up on the hill and up out on the trails, interact with the kids too. That's just being another person.
That's so cool.
Checking in. I know I've been hearing a lot more, like, how you doing at practice too. So
We're trying to do it. When I worked before at the Rapids, we had like a fleet of people, and it was awesome because you just stand on the side of the soccer field, and people just come up to you. Yeah. I went to DU for grad school, so we worked with them.
I'm sure that most people are gonna stick around for a little bit. I think they're taking us out here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Oh man.
Yeah, can we exchange contact?
Yeah. I don't have my phone. Here, wait.
You're good. If you put it on,
Yeah.
I'll shoot you a text
Just
or
text
email.
me. I was
Perfect.
like, how do these things work?
Do you guys have any tips for encouraging a kid to see a therapist? Just like have them, like, you know.
I go to the friends every time. See if you can figure out a way to get one of their friends in therapy. Talk to the other parents. It's amazing. Teenagers are just insane with their friends. Like it is it.
Making them try one. You can always say like, hey, try once. If anything, you hate it and you leave. But most people, and you can definitely direct it towards. I have really good contacts that are like in the sports world too.
Yep.
If they're athletes and they want to like talk to somebody that's an athlete or something.
You can phrase it as athlete mindset training.
Yeah, not therapy necessarily.
Yeah, that's another one that works well. If they're like super into skiing, it's like acuity training.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people that come to me that are
Thank
like
you.
that teenage range, and I have a lot of BSF people, they use it as sports and performance psychology.
You're gonna go.
So they direct it more as that.
Right.
So that then
Do I need to take your wallet away?
You take it from there. It's hard because a lot of times it's still just stigma.
I didn't even
against it,
bring
of
mine
course.
in the store.